I'm going to take you on a magical trip through Music Land, where you can meet and get to know personally all of our chord change friends so that you could recognize them by ear when you hear them. And I have here the apple of my eye, your grandmother, playing guitar. She's a very adept guitar player, so she's gonna help me with expressing these chord changes. So we're gonna just, for reference, use the key of C. So if you could play me a C major scale, so we can know how that feels. Okay. And so if we're starting with the major 1 chord in the key of C, that's a C major. So if you get to know that chord feels like being home, relaxed. And if you were going somewhere else to another chord, when you come back to that chord, that relaxation becomes relief. You're relieved when you come back there. And it's a similar feeling if you were in the minor version of that 1 chord, if we were in a C minor. But it's also got a lot more dark emotions to it. You're home, but you're paranoid and feeling kind of mischievous and up to something. And all of the minor versions of each of these chord changes are going to be kind of the same thing, but a little sadder or a little more darkly emotive. So if we went back to that C major, and then we stepped up to a D7, the 2 major, it's like we're stepping out on the town and we're ready to go somewhere. That place, that somewhere, is often the 5 chord, because that 2 is the 5 of the 5 chord, and so it always wants to lead you back to the 5. But if we were going to be on that C major chord, and then we went to the D minor, that's it's similar to going to that D major or D7, but it's also stepping out, but it's kind of like you're stepping out and going somewhere sad or leaving somebody. Like that song, Silver Wings. Silver Wings. Silver wings, shining in the sunlight. Okay, so that's where it goes to the minor 2, because he's leaving or she's leaving, it's taking her away. So that's what the minor 2 feels like. Okay, so if we were going back to that 1 chord, and we were gonna go to a major 3. It's like this emotional, uplifting feeling, maybe tears, but tears of joy. And if you were going to that chord, so he's going from a C to an E7. If we were going to that same actually, no, that's not true. Never mind. Okay, so the 3 minor chord, if we're going from the C to the E minor, it also feels like you're pulling yourself up, but it's very sad, so it's kind of more struggling, like you're struggling to get out of bed or something. So now here's a very common chord change, the 1 to the major 4. So that's kind of one of the most common things you would ever go to from that 1 chord. Just moving around the circle of fourths there. You're ready to go out on a musical adventure. You're going somewhere, you're ready. But just likewise with all of the minor versions, if you're going from the 1 chord to the 4 minor chord, it's like you're happening out on this adventure, but something really sad happened. And usually that minor 4 will be coming right after the major 4. And so it's like you were on the adventure having fun in that major 4, but then it goes down to the sad, oh no, something sad happens, like you're playing Oregon Trail and one of your members got cholera. Okay, so here's the very, very common progression going from the 1 chord to the 5 chord, the major. Yeah, and doesn't that make you want to go back to that 1 chord, kind of? This is like the intrinsic destination of chord changes, and it's just the counter chord. You just want to go back to the 5, back to the 1. But what if you were going from the 1 chord to the minor 5? Still feels like you're going to the other side, going to the 5, but it's, more depressing. So if you're dealing with depression a lot and it's a very recognizable feeling, that's kind of what it's like to go from the 1 to the 5 minor. It's like you go up and down in this manic depression cycle, which many of us are familiar with. All right, so we're halfway there, kids. Now we're gonna go from the 1 chord to the major 6. Doesn't it kind of feel like we step down? The other ones I was feeling like we're rising up to them. This one I feel like I'm going and then stepping down. I don't feel bad about it or anything. It's like we're about to step out, maybe go to that 2 chord that feels like stepping out. So that's a really common progression, going from 1 to down to the 6 and then to the 2. So that's part of a very common progression in jazz called rhythm changes, that's named after I've got rhythm, I've got music. Alright, what if we're going from the 1 chord to the minor 6? So that doesn't feel quite as sad as some of the other minors. You know why? Because that is the natural minor of C major. It's just in the same key. You're not doing any borrowed chords there. And so it's like stepping down, but kind of just as a rest from too much bright major stuff. Yeah, I don't feel too sad hearing that. Yeah, okay, let's just step it back a little. All right, now we'll talk about going from the 1 chord to the major 7. It just kind of feel like this temporary lean over into the 7 that is just a half step away. So that's what will naturally fall into the major scale, but you don't really stay there much because it really wants to lead into that 1. So now that we've led back to that 1, let's go back down and talk about some flat chords and how they feel. So we just talked about going to the 7 that's right next to the 1. What if we go to the flat 7? This is a very common thing to do. So it feels like we can stay there longer, and especially if our 1 chord were minor. And so when we go from the minor 1 to the flat 7, that's going to fall more naturally with the minor scale that we're centering our song around. And that's called being in Aeolian mode, when you're centering it around a natural minor scale, because that minor scale is relating as the 6th to the major 1. So it feels like we can stay on that flat 7 because it's kind of like going to the 5, because it's going to the 5 chord of what would be the relative major of that minor. So what if we went from 1, major 1, down to flat 6? There it is. Oh my gosh, so much tension right there. It's like you're on the adventure and then something really scary, like the villain just walked in. Okay, back to the 1. So that's what the flat 6 feels like. Often country people will call that a flat 6, people who play country music. And then often jazz players will call that a sharp 5. But it's really going to the same chord. How about the flat 5? Thank you, dear. That's very interesting. It's pretty rare that you would go to a major flat 5, but it's rather common to go to a diminished flat 5, especially after a major 4 chord. So in jazz, it's very common to go from the 4 chord to the diminished flat 5 or sharp 4, same thing, diminished sharp 4. It means, you feel that? It's just leading you into the turnaround of the song. So that's your flat 4, how that feels. It's just like taking another little step towards the end. So now, we're not going to talk about flat 4. Do you know why? Because in a major scale, 3 and 4 are only a half step apart. So going to a flat 4 is going to be the same thing as going to a 3. So we don't need to talk about it. We already talked about going to a 3. That was the uplift, confident feeling. Would you agree, honey? Thank you. She agrees with me. She's very nice. So now we'll go to the flat 3 from the major 1. Anytime now. Thank you, dear. So how does that feel? That feels like this wizened old cowboy has appeared in the picture, and maybe he's been a villain in the past, but he's turned around, and now he's just a complicated person. But it's a very different feeling if you go to what would be the flat 3 from that Aeolian mode. If you were starting in the minor 1, so C minor to E flat. You feel that? So that's sort of the feeling of the wizened cowboy, but it's really this feeling of going home almost. He's getting home. He's come, everyone is welcoming him again after he had all these fights with people, because once again, that's just going from the Aeolian to the Ionian. They have a very clear connection, that minor and major relatives. Okay, and the last one we'll talk about is the flat 2. So going from the 1 chord. So when you go to the flat 2, it's similar to when you were going to the major 2, regular 2, but it kind of feels like you're stepping out like the major 2, but you're kind of running late and you're kind of discombobulated, you're kind of behind. It's got a little more tension to it. So those are some of the personalities. Ooh, there we are, we're discombobulated and late. Of the chords, and so if you get to know them, you can hear them in a jam or in a performance and just know how they feel, or you can use these personalities for choosing them in composition. So thank you very much to your grandmother, Frances, and we'll see you next time. Enjoy your new chord, friends.